Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us again. I'm going to make sure I show my screen as well. Here we go. And showing main screen, it's not showing main screen, right? The best thing to do is start with a technical problem. Let's see. Screen, all screens, this screen, screen 2, this one. Okay. Let's go. Are you seeing my screen there, everyone? I feel like I've repeated this several times.
I'm not seeing it.
Over the last few months. All right. Great. What if we do it the other way around? What if I do screen 2?
But who wants to see a screen when I can see all of your lovely faces?
I know. All right. Okay. We'll have to. No screen though. Okay. Let's pretend that wasn't the start. So welcome everyone. We're delighted to see you back again. And I'm Simon Walker, I'm Director of Training at Maxon, and we are delighted to welcome this time, as well as Nick and Chad, who I'll introduce in a second, but we're delighted to welcome Christine. So thank you for joining us, Christine.
Ooh. Oh, you bet.
Christine,
hi.
Hiya. She's the Group Product Manager for the Red Giant lines at Maxon, and is directly responsible or runs the team that helps make sure that the Trapcode updates get out on time and all the new features get folded in and all the new ideas and plans for it. So she is the one that knows it all. So we're delighted to have you here to keep us honest, essentially.
I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. And so also we welcome back our Trapcode experts, Nick Harauz and Chad Perkins. Welcome back, you two.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here.
And the idea of today is that we're going to be running through the new features in Trapcode 5, which is part of the Trapcode Suite 16. And I have on my screen here the schedule, which won't share for a technical reason. So I'll tell you what it is, but basically, so in fact, you'll see it on the registration link, and I'll copy all these notes into the chat window. But essentially, we're going to break up into 3 weeks, and we're going to cover some of the features in a little more detail, so we can talk them through and make sure that we kind of go through and find out nice ways of dealing with these new features. So they're not just new features; they are reasons that you can be more creative, essentially. So. Okay, and I'll put the link, all the links in the chat window, as well as answer those questions. Great. And yes, we're being recorded, and yes, you will get the link automatically at the end of the hour. Great, fantastic. So imagine that I've just spent the next 2 minutes actually physically showing that on screen. and all that wonderfulness, and see if I can figure out how I can share something whilst the rest of you are presenting. If not, I'll do another mime at the end. Because the other thing I wanted to do is to give you a code for the Maxon merch store, where we've got some t-shirts available. I managed to get a code out of Maxon where you can get a free t-shirt of the various designs. So I'll put that into the chat window as well. In fact, even this very t-shirt that I am wearing.
That's awesome.
Can I get one too?
That's great.
I would be happy to get one. Okay.
Can we use the code?
Yeah, I was
really.
thinking the same thing too.
We can probably arrange that, Christine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so without further ado, let's see if we can make this work. I'm going to make you a presenter now, Nick.
Okay.
Here we go.
And I'm going to show my screen. And at the same time, I'm just going to disable my webcam too, so you guys can see all just my Trapcode interface, if that sounds good.
Excellent. I'm going to do the same thing just to make it a little easier to see. Here we go. So
Indeed.
Awesome. So I was going to talk about a new feature in Particular, which is called Velocity over Life. And I have a couple examples that I'll go back to in a little bit. But this is just a great way to get control of your particle system right away. And to me, one of the simplest examples to show is how it can relate for things like 3D objects. And in particular, if you're new to it, there are some 3D objects that ship as presets, but then anything essentially that's an OBJ or a Cinema 4D file, as long as it's you do certain things to that Cinema 4D file, you can use that as a reference to emit your particles from. So let's start off here with this light example. And in fact, I'm just going to kind of turn these off and start from scratch with a lovely new solid, which I'll call particular. And maybe even spell it right. So let's hop over into the effect menu and good old RG Trapcode and simply to particular here. So after a second, we should see the lovely new point emitter system that will show up here. And we can see all those particles emitting about 100 particles per second, or exactly if I'm correct. So instead, to show this velocity over life, I'm going to hop into the designer. And on my way there, I do want to make a mention, if you're used to the previous version of Trapcode, when you selected a preset, there were two categories. So there was a single system preset category and a multiple system preset category. And now when you look over here, everything is in one place. So your single and multiple systems are all in one place. And if I'm correct, there are several new presets. And if I were a betting man, I would take, is it in the motion graphics section that we can see a lot of some of the new features in place?
There's a lot of them there. They're actually kind of spread across a number of the categories, but yeah, a huge proportion are in motion graphics.
Yeah, so there's some really robust systems. Like, I'm a big fan of this beacon. And if you're used to using After Effects, you press the C key, and all of a sudden I have my unified camera tools in action to move around this system. And this is just to bear in mind that this does not have an impact on your actual After Effects camera. This is primarily used for previewing inside the designer. So let me just reset this system back to the regular point system. And I'm going to hop over here to the side of emitter types. And let's just switch this to a 3D model. Right away, nothing happens. But the cool part here is I'm going to go to choose model. And now we have a variety of presets which have been here for a while. One thing that I do want to mention is that if you have an OBJ or a Cinema 4D file, you can actually add it here rather than having to bring it into After Effects. So as long as you know the system location or where you save that on an external drive, simply reference that OBJ from here by simply clicking on this button, and it will be loaded into this library and saved under this custom section here at the bottom. For now, though, I'm going to select this light bulb, click on here, and what I don't see is like, okay, I can kind of make out the light bulb here in the background, but because the particles are emitting consistently every single second at a specific velocity, I can't really make out this shape. So one thing that I could do is, if I head to the motion block here in the designer, is head to the velocity section, of course, bring this down to 0. But what's new is this lovely little velocity over life graph. And we can do a few things to start to make sense of this, what's happening here with our particle system. So first of all, I'm going to actually choose a preset here. And I'll choose this one. And I'm going to click on this little 2 arrow icon to reverse that. So right now, these particles start at a velocity of 0 and then slowly ramp up to the current value of the velocity that's set, which is 100 with a little bit of randomness, about 20%. In fact, just to highlight that, I'll make this 200. And just to see a few more particles being born, I'm going to head back to the emitter type, and let's crank up the particles per second to like 1,000. So now we can start to make out the light bulb, but still, the magic is that we can customize this graph even further. And for something like this light bulb, what I would do is actually not use or draw a curve in this window. I'm actually going to click on this little icon to sort of get these points. And I find this to be a great place to work with velocity over life, because I can simply trigger this to have no velocity at the very beginning of the animation. And then right towards the end, this is where the velocity over life ramps up. So this is based as well on how long your particles live for, which is currently set to a value of 3 seconds. So if we needed this to last longer on the screen or have additional control, I could simply head back to particle type or go into particle type and then crank up this life value to say something like 5 with a little bit of randomness. And just this feature alone, we right now have the 3D item that these particles are emitting from. We can start to make this out, and then slowly over time, these particles start with their velocity out. We can trigger this even further with directing the flow of motion by not having these particles emit 360 degrees around, but in fact, in a specific direction as well. So that's the basics of the velocity over life. And I'm going to come back to an example combining it with emit from parent, which is extremely powerful. But before I do, Chad, I know that you have an example in regards to this velocity over life. So I was going to hand over the screen to you.
Let's do it.
That sounds good. Let me just find you from this list of people. There's Chad. And
just before we do that, I was going to say, could you just point out how some of the blocks are looking differently on the interface? But we can come back to that.
Okay, yeah, sure. I can show that the difference in the blocks after the fact. If sorry, I just handed over the screen. That's why.
Okay, no worries.
Sorry about that.
I think I stole the screen. How are? Can you see my screen?
We can see your second screen. It's showing the one that you've got your notes and so on it.
Okay.
You can in that drop down. You can choose the first one, I think.
Let's see here.
There we go.
Oh wait. How's that?
I see After Effects.
Okay, great. I'm having some like monitor issues with Windows. I'm having a lot of issues with Windows actually. And so that's one of them. So it says my main monitor is not my main monitor, etc. So anyways, I just worked on this movie. Are y'all seeing the drag queens? Is that what's going on?
You got it.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I worked on this movie, which is the Jinx and Della holiday special, which sees with these like legendary drag queens, Jinx Monsoon and Vendela Creme. And so I just finished working on that, and I used Particular through all of it, and it's just this really great movie. And I wasn't able to use the new version of Particular, but I knew that it was there. I knew it was coming, and so I was aware of those features. And so one of the things that I struggled with is that I had this scene where I had to create some smoke, kids, because it was cold outside and there was frost in the air probably. And so I struggled with this a lot, and this is something that I often run into with Particular, or I used to run into it, where I would want to create something kind of like where like she's blowing out the smoke and there is kind of like this gust and then it slows. And then I kind of have to like hack it with like the wind system that used to be there and air resistance and things like that. But situations like this, and let me actually like turn this up a little bit. This would be another great example, a great time to use the velocity over life, because I would want it to have a lot of velocity initially and then kind of slowly dissipate the velocity at the end. So I think the example that Nick just showed with the light bulb has a lot more practical usage, especially if you're using like a text emitter or a mask emitter where you want to be able to see the shape of the thing. A lot of times in those cases, what I would used to do is I used to use form and then also particular so that I could see the shape, but then also have the particles kind of like emitting and dying out. And now you don't have to do that anymore with the velocity over life. But this is another instance where like smoke blowing out or some things where you want particles to kind of like, you know, jut out and then slow down. But with all the physics stuff that we're going to cover this month, there's like a billion different ways to do that. Maybe not a billion, maybe there's like a few million, but like there's a lot of different ways to cover the new physics. But I want to dig into several of these emit from parent. So the aux system in Particular is gone. So when you load up Particular, no aux anything. And that's been replaced by this new system called Emit from Parent. And so if I go into my systems, by the way, this is just kind of like the default settings in particular that we all know and love. And I'm intentionally starting out kind of boring so that we can just really tell what's going on. And then we'll get into like sexier examples as we go. But I'm going to go into my show systems here. You can see now that we have 16 systems. So they added an extra 8 systems. So you got a bunch of stuff, and there's a reason for that. Let me set this up really quick before I do that. I'm just going to go into my emitter. I'm going to create a box emitter, and let's make the size really big. And I want to emit from the direction outwards. So then we kind of have this kind of like, mock space thing. Again, this is like super slopped together just so we can explain this emit over parent idea. So now what I'm going to do is I want to go to my my systems. And I'm just going to launch the designer, actually. I'm going to launch the designer.
I've got a question for you.
Do it.
It's just something that a conversation I get into quite often when we're running training sessions is doing stuff in the designer versus doing stuff in the panel. And I'm guessing that you are very used to doing work in the panel. You know what you're doing and you're looking out for stuff. But do you find yourself now with the designer that it's easier to play around and see what you're creating if you're getting playback as well? Or just like, how do you like to work generally?
Yeah, I love doing that. Like being able to see like the blocks system and to know the category, the visual categories is immensely helpful. So I think like I'm familiar enough with Particular now where like I know the stuff that the designer does well and the stuff that I have to do or prefer to do maybe with like expressions or whatever in the main effect control panel area of Particular. And so I just kind of like do the things that I can do in the designer, and then whatever's left I use in the effect control panel. But yeah, the designer is definitely a great visual way to work and to see your animations as you're setting them up, and without having to preview because it's like constantly going. And like Nick said with the camera thing, like to see how things would work in 3D without messing up my current camera system, like that's invaluable. So yeah, I'm there all the time. Does that answer your like question? I feel like it wasn't like I don't have tons to add to that, but yeah, I like using the designer wherever I can.
No, that's great. That's interesting to hear.
And then so for what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to this drop down and I'm going to duplicate this system. So then I have 2 different systems of these stars that are kind of like, shooting out. And I'll go ahead and apply this. Now, all that stuff being said, I'm going to work here in the effect controls panel because again, with the Windows thing, like the buttons in my designer are harder to see because I have this like high DPI thing going on and Windows doesn't do a great job of that. But what I have now is this second system. And what I can do with my second system is change the emitter type from, one of the standard things to emit from parent system. So this is the new aux particles. And what's really powerful about this is that we can use any system as a parent system. So we could have all like 15 systems using the primary system as the parent system. Or we could have system 5 being the parent of system 6 and system 7 being the parent of system 8 or whatever. You can control any system by any system, which is really an incredible flexible thing. And honestly, I'm still trying to play with all the different things you can do because it's such a powerful way to work that it's like a revolution. I mean, a good kind of revolution, not like a, overthrow the government, bad kind of revolution. So I'm going to emit from parent system. And initially we have this massive chaos. So you do have to kind of be careful with this. One of the things I find myself doing is just before I even turn this on, I'll take down the particles per second down to a lot, or maybe take off the visibility of the parent system because this can be really crazy. So now when I emit from the parent system, I choose the primary system. The default settings use continuously emit these particles. So it's 100 particles per second emitted from 100% of the particles, which again is a lot of particles. So I'm going to turn this down so that maybe it's only like 50 particles per second, and let's just say that only 10% of the particles, 10% of the parent particles emit other particles. So again, the primary system is becoming like each particle is becoming a particle emitter, which is crazy. And I'm also going to take down the velocity to like 0. So we have no velocity. And what's cool about this is that you can create these kind of strings of effects. And so we have some stars, and then we have some kind of like, you know, like Star Trek warp things. And so really what these little stars are particles that are being created by this second system. So the main particle at the front is from the parent system, and then it's emitting this trail, and it's a trail because of the lack of velocity. And you can do all kinds of fun things too. So I could go in here into my particle section, and I could change maybe the size over life. So I can say, like use this little default preset, which says they're big in the beginning, and then they shrink as they as over life, they get smaller, and that creates these kind of like pinpoint little streaks. And so you can do some really interesting stuff with this that you can't do with other systems. Now I have this other example like set up, and this is actually kind of, this is not something you'd ever really want to use. This looks horrible. But what I did then was created a third system where I did the same thing, but I used this new system, the streaks, as the parent for another system of particles. And as you can imagine, this is, you know, this looks terrible, but I was just kind of fiddling around, and I thought, should I include this in the webinar? And, you know, I still am not sure if that was a good idea or not, but just to show you like what you can do is that like, so I have the main particle that's like the star from my primary system, and then the primary system 2 is like the streak, and then the primary system 3 uses the, if I click on system 3 here, it's using system 2 as the parent, and now it's creating these streaks that fall off. Now next week there's like a really cool example with fireworks that that we'll show you, that because fireworks is really like the ultimate way to show this off, and it's a really cool example. We'll get into that next week. But this is just like some other ideas of stuff that you can do. I mean, like particles can emit from particles that emit particles that emit particles. It's just, you can keep going down this rabbit hole of all these different options, which is pretty fun.
I've got a question for Christine actually about this, because in the previous version of Particular, you had a block right at the end. In fact, Chad, would you mind opening up the designer?
Yeah, I do not mind doing that.
It's just showing everything very
on the
small.
previous version of Particular, you had a block on the right hand side where you could switch on and off the aux particles. So but I get it now that it's actually better to have that ability based on multiple stacks of systems. But was there much toing and froing into the thought process behind that, or was it just the case of, because it's exponential, it was better to have it stacked on systems rather than just have multiple aux buttons?
Well, it's not just the exponential. So obviously that gives you more creative control, but the aux particles were very limited in what you could do with them. They only really could do what you're seeing here, the streaks kind of thing. They were pretty difficult to get a lot of creativity beyond that, versus now it's a full particle system, excuse me, that you can have emitting. So you can have it do anything that the basic one would do, be it whatever type of particles you want, whatever type of emission that you want them to do, whether you want them to be happening off of a bounce and then off of when those parent particles die, when there's so much more creative ability now by allowing you to have a full particle system instead of the limited controls in the aux that we really wanted to do it. And you know, that was something we've wanted to do for many years, and it's been a big request from customers, but we had to do a whole lot of, we had to basically rebuild Particular from the ground up on this release to be able to do a lot of what you're going to see over the next few weeks in this course, which is exciting. But this is one of the things we had to rebuild it to be able to do.
Does that mean, sorry, Chad, completely hijacked.
No, please, hijack away.
But I just wondered, often we get asked if there's a like maximum particle count for particular. And especially if you're getting the ability to emit particles from particles and then emit from those particles as well.
It's really easy to get really high really quickly. There's not a maximum, but actually, Chad, if you exit the designer, let me show you a cool little thing here that a lot of people don't know is there.
Yes, in the emitter section.
Yeah, in the show system section. Right there,
Oh,
at the very bottom right there, under all systems, shows you how many particles are visible. So especially now that, like Chad was showing, the default is still to emit 100 particles per second. If you've got a couple stacked or chained systems there that are all doing that, you can end up so quickly at like 400,000 or a couple million particles happening, and you won't necessarily know why is it slowed down a bunch. Check out how many particles you have, because if you've got it asking to do a couple million, it's going to go a lot slower. But that's a really useful thing to know that it's there. And no, there's not a maximum that we know of, but it definitely will depend on your system as to how fast it's going to render.
Very cool. And that question about how many particles, or is there a limit, may or may not be one of the questions on the Trapcode certification exam. Just saying.
Well, I hope I pass it.
You just got a freebie, everybody.
That's right.
Check mark.
I don't know what you're talking about, Chad.
Oh, hey, I want to add on to Christine's comment, on Simon's comment, on my comment. Because as like a person that does work, I often get really scared when I hear software designers say like they build things from the ground up, because what I hear is then nothing is going to work anymore.
I know.
But what's really cool for everybody is that like the migration stuff, it works. They made it so that like all of your old stuff works. So I did this in a previous version of Particular, and then when I loaded the new version, brought this in, migrated the settings perfectly, everything works great. So don't be scared when you hear we built things from the ground up, we changed a lot of stuff, because all the old stuff still works, which is kind of miraculous and great.
We were pretty darn excited to be able to do that, because we weren't so sure that would happen. But yeah, we put a lot of work in to make that the case. So, yay.
So if you've got an older project, they're backwards compatible. So if you're opening a previous version of Trapcode, you get the button that says migrate settings, and then it transfers those different settings.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
So, okay, good. Thanks for interjecting all that stuff. It's like so much more fun when like we all talk. It's like this big community fun thing. So another feature that I really love, kind of like what Christine was saying with like the aux particles before, you know, what we have now is, you know, it's not just creating aux particles and then you could have more aux particles and you could pick your parent. Like it goes beyond all that stuff, and there's just a lot of really cool features. So what I'm going to do is I have my my fire hydrant emitting some like cute cartoony water. I'm going to go ahead and take the creative liberties and call it cute. But so I have this water, but then, you know, there's no like splash at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the designer. And sorry, I'm dealing with these two monitors. I'm going to keep bringing this over every time. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to duplicate it. I'm just going to create a new system. I'm just going to click the plus button, start from scratch. So now I have these two systems here. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply. And then what I want to do is I want to go to system 2. And again, I'm going to just start by just taking this particle count down quite a bit. And I'm going to change my emitter type to emit from parent system. And the parent system's primary, because it's the only other system. And then it by default makes this continuous stuff. And this is not what I want in this case. And you know what I could do maybe is like take this down to 10 and play with this and maybe get some kind of like, you know, white cappy froth things. I think it's another really great use of the emit from parent system. And they put a lot of, as we'll see in the next few minutes, they put a lot of thought into different ways you can control like child particles, which is really fantastic. But what I'm going to do is actually go to this drop down, emit from parent behavior, because this is where a lot of this power of this new version comes from, is from these options. So we looked at continuous, where you're continuously emitting particles, but this is a great one, this parent at parent end of life. So I have my particles dying out here. And what I can do is maybe take this down to like 7 particles a second, and then I can go ahead and increase like the size a little bit and maybe size random a bunch, and I'll take down the sphere feather. And then what I can do here is I now have this kind of like white cap that's like when these particles die, they turn into the new white particles. They turn into the new system, basically. And I have another example. I'm just gonna just cut to the, like a cooking show. I'm gonna cut to the version that's like a little bit.
It's one I baked earlier.
Yes, yes, exactly. Just spent like a little bit more time on the final result, but you can see that now we have these like frothy particles, and I didn't have to set anything up for that interaction. It's just as soon as the parent particles die, that it creates a new set of particles. And so then you can create these really cool experiences like this where things happen when particles die out, which is again, really, really handy and really easy to set up. There's some really cool stuff you could do with bounce as well, kind of like you just saw in aux particles. I'll get to that in just a second, but it's a pretty cool thing. As I've been playing around with this on my own, this is like one of my favorite things, the parent end of life. A lot of really cool things you could do with that.
You should have heard the fun names we tried to come up with for how to say when the parent dies, when parent, what horrible things can we say? What I would say on here is it brings up another good point about why it's neat to have, instead of an aux system, to have it as a full emit from parent, is talking back to what Nick was saying, how we have all these new presets, especially like in the motion graphics. All those presets now, you could take those and parent them to any other system. So if you see presets of very cool trails and things, you can actually just parent them to anything you want now. Or on these bubbles, if you wanted to get one of the steam or smoke ones or something like that that's already built as a preset, you can have it then parent that preset on at the end of the particle life, when those particles die, when they're killed off.
When the parents commit patricide.
Yep.
Chad, I was going to say that I also love the way that you, in this example, set up the second system. Like usually for a long time, at least in the previous version of Particular, I was one to go into the designer and duplicate the particle system. But when it comes to like emit from parent, like being able to create a new system just in case your first primary system has a super large particle count, I think is like also a nice preventative step to make sure that you're, when you emit from your parent system, that it doesn't go haywire, if that makes sense. So for example, if your first system is like emitting 1,000 particles or 2,000 particles per second, if you emit from parent through a duplication, that's going to then emit 1,000 particles per each particle, which might not be the best for your system. So I love the fact that you just created a new system on your setup and wanted to mention it.
Yeah, thanks, man.
No problem.
And I'm open up the back in the designer because of something Christine said that I wanted to point out that I think is really, really cool and really helpful with that. And also to me, this changes the usefulness of presets, because typically when I click a preset, it replaces everything. So if I have I click on a multiple system preset, it replaces all of my systems. And so then if I wanted to have like one child, like this blue swarm with trail, if I wanted to have this blue swarm with trail preset added onto or become a child of something else or whatever, now what I can do is alt click this, right? I mean, like I haven't tried this yet, but I got this. Yeah, so I can alt click. So now like I can append this preset onto what I have already, and it doesn't have to completely wipe out everything, which again, I think makes the presets a lot more useful. And like a little bonus trick I just got from Harry Frank. I think it's fantastic.
That's great.
And a little usability tidbit when you're back in the designer, if you ever do find that you've added on a bunch and it's all of a sudden going to do huge amounts of particles and it's gotten kind of stuck getting up to that frame, if you hit the first frame key on the timeline, that'll take it back to the beginning and stop that caching process and jump it forward, just in case you've gotten yourself into a position like Nick just said, where you've added too many all of a sudden that it just kind of gets stuck there. You don't even have to pause it. You can just hit that first frame right there.
Oh, gotcha.
Yep.
Awesome.
And that'll take you back and restart it on the smaller number. If you've just
that's brilliant.
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Little tidbit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Live
great statement.
training right here.
All right.
Okay, so this is another like really quick example, like, and this is admittedly kind of like a not great example, but it's a really cool feature nonetheless that I wanted to share, even if my example isn't great. So this is a thing that I did for the Jinx and Della movie. Like at one point, Jinx here, she's telling a nativity story, a version of it anyways, and she's an innkeeper, or no, she's an angel, and then she she becomes an innkeeper, and they wanted to have like kind of more of a transition there. And in the real version, I just used these gold particles here. But another thing that I was playing around with the new version of Particular was these kind of like blue stars, just adding these blue stars in. And what's kind of cool is that there is this new emission over parent life. So I believe that this is new. I don't recall seeing anything like this in a previous version of Particular with the ox
This
particles.
used to be, for ox particles, we had a start percentage and stop percentage that, again, we thought was a little too limiting. So instead of that, we've replaced it with this graph, so you can have more
Yeah,
control.
because then like the particles can like not emit in the beginning and then emit throughout. So then like what I did with these blue sparkles is I made it so that like as the gold particles are dying out, then they start emitting the blue ones. And again, this is not a good example in terms of being able to clearly see what's going on, but you can see that just does kind of add some fun effects. And there's kind of like almost like a blue, like a little like mini blue trail of the stars like right here, because they are being emitted at the end of the parent life, but or towards the end of parent life. So it's not like before when they die out. It's I can choose exactly where in the lifespan of the parent particle that the blue stars are emitted. I think that that's really cool. I mean, it's like a very subtle change here, but it keeps the gold particles, you know, in the front as gold, and then like these blue little stars kind of become this blue trail. And I don't know, I think it's kind of fun.
I think it's very cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sometimes those subtle details are really interesting, and it kind of gives that extra sense of professionalism or more depth as you're working into it without having to spend ages or creating it as a duplicate, putting it onto another layer, and all those old tricks we used to do. And we just
exactly.
quick question as well
for me. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Ted. A quick question from Demetrius. Is this Jinx Monsoon?
This is Jinx Monsoon. Yes, this is their holiday special. It's fantastic.
You'll notice, Demetrius, in the chat, I put a link to the website. And in fact, I'll put it in again in case that has timed out on the chat. Here we go.
Thanks, Simon. So yeah, this was like a ton of fun to work on. And the drag queens loved Particular, and I loved doing Particular for the drag queens. It was phenomenal, and I really enjoyed it. Let me move on to a couple other things really quick. There's just so much here. This is like an unfinished example. So this is not done. This is like a work in progress, but I thought I would show it anyways because it's another fun thing of things to do. We'll probably see this more this month. But there's like this CG like war where there's like this kind of like character that's like raising up, and then she like shoots out some like stuff, some magic. And this is a work in progress. Like there's object buffers that need to happen, and there's all kinds of extra effects or whatever that need to happen. But I want to show this to you anyways. But just as a couple examples of some other things to do. So I wanted to create these kind of like light rays, and I'm not sure this effect, the style isn't exactly what I want, but I know I wanted like these kind of like streaks. So I know that I can create these kind of streaks by using the parent system thing that we talked about, where I have like these ox particles or whatever. But I didn't really want to see the standard particles of like Particular with like the little dots. So what I did is I created the original system, and I want to turn off the visibility of this other business here so I can show you what I was doing. And then I just made the particles invisible. So this is what the particles actually look like. So there's actually like particles here. And then what I did is like I made the second system based on the parent, the dots, and then they emit a bunch of particles which create these streaks. And then I went back to the dots and just turned off the visibility of the parent so they don't exist. And then that allows it to just get these kind of cool string things. And then I wanted to create this kind of like interaction when like they hit his hands. So I have this 3D solid layer that I'm using as a collision plane. So it's just a 3D solid. It's just a 3D solid. There's nothing special about it. No offense, 3D solid. You're wonderful. Your parents love you, but I'm just saying that it's just a regular 3D solid. And then what I did is that in these parent particles, what I did is I had the particles bounce. So I set up in the physics here, I enabled bounce in the physics simulation and just chose the collision plane and had the parent, the particles die. So those little dots that I showed you earlier die out when they hit that solid. So then what I did here is I had this new system here, and notice that both the streaks are based on system 3, and then also the reaction here is also based on system 3. So system 3 is a parent to multiple children systems. And so then I changed the emitter behavior here to emit on parent bounce. So when the particles, the little circles, the dots that we don't see, when they hit the plane, they die. And that triggers system 5, which is these stars. So they emit on parent bounce. And so we kind of create this like interaction between, you know, this like laser blasts and pew, pew, pew. It's funner when you have sound effects, but yeah.
Yes, I was going to say it looks really
effects?
cool.
I could explain more about the sound effects if you'd like.
I was going to say it looks really cool, but now it sounds really cool as well. but this ability to bounce stuff, Christine, that you presented this in a different way because it's a new implementation. Was there a lot of toing and froing to kind of work out how those bounce parameters were going to work with particles when they hit collision planes like 3D solids?
There was, well, the whole bounce, first of all, air and bounce working together never had happened before. Now it can. So now what that also meant for us, because we redid all the physics, which again isn't today, but we've allowed you to have 3 different bounce planes that you choose. And because you can choose whether they are sliding or sticking or dying or bouncing off of each of those planes, but that also interacts with how the physics are. So if it's windy and they're sliding, you can control how much will they stick to that surface, for instance. How much there's so much control now around that bounce. And I just see here we give a choice on the children's systems of do they emit on the parent bounce or do they emit when the parent dies. There's a couple different ways of working that around. So there's lots of ways to make things look a lot more organic and hopefully get them to do more of what you were hoping they do, such as bouncing off of her hands right there, then falling down to the ground and maybe sticking to the ground or whatever your other layer is that you choose.
Got it. In fact, I was just about to comment on this, and Dan's jumped in with a question, which might be a feature request about: is it possible to rename the systems and like call them streaks or call them laser and have them refer visually back?
Yeah, not currently, but that is something we absolutely know needs to happen and hasn't happened yet.
Cool. Got it. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more very quick example, and again, it's a very ugly example, but it's I think very helpful. So one of the things you could also do here is when you create a child system, you can emit from parent speed. Now, this actually confused me, and I didn't reach out to anybody's help because I wanted to try to figure out what's going on here. And I think this is brilliantly implemented. I love this but it was confusing to me because parent speed, like if I go to my parent system, like speed isn't a choice. Like you don't have, like you can't control parent speed. But what it is, it's the speed of the parent particles that emits the particles. So here I have two systems. I have just like a regular like system of dots, like white dots. And let's go ahead and turn this off. It's a system of white dots. And again, this is a horrible, boring example, but it's clear about what's going on, which I think is more helpful in this case. So just plain white dots, and they initially don't move at all. They just stay here, constantly emitting particles in the same spot, no velocity. And then they move, the position of the emitter moves, and then they kind of just sit there for a little bit, and then the velocity animates, and then all of a sudden now there's more velocity. And then the second system is a bunch of like red hearts, and they're emitting from the parent speed. Now, what this means is that if the particles themselves move at all for any reason, that triggers the emission of the child particles. So right here at the beginning, when the white particles are just, there's no velocity, there's no movement, there's no hearts. But as the particle system moves, then it generates hearts. But then as the particle system stops, it stops emitting hearts. And this is the emitter right here. It stops emitting hearts. But then as the velocity moves, as the velocity increases, then it starts generating hearts. So as the particles move for any reason, whether it's by position or velocity or whatever, that triggers the emission of particles when you're choosing parent speed. And so it becomes this kind of like procedural workflow, which if we change the speed of the particles, again, it regulates the emission of the children, which is really flexible and something that's very exciting. But anyways, that's kind of like a really quick overview of all these new options for emit from parent system. And again, as we go through the rest of the new features in particular this month, we'll start to see as like, you know, Christine kind of gave us some spoilers about like, you know, the air and the bounce and the physics and all that kind of stuff. And all these things can then work together to create completely new effects that we haven't seen from Particular before, which is really exciting.
That's a great example.
That's really cool.
Thanks. And then Nick, I can give it back to you, or you can steal it from me. Oh, wait, change presenter.
There you go.
I'm gonna give it back to the loving, trusting arms of
Such
Nick.
an interesting technique you got here, Chad, because previously we were tied into having to create nulls and then animate those and then tie the emitter, and it would only then necessarily move as and when you keyframe and so on. But being able to do that and then switch off the visibility and have things trigger like that, especially that trick where you switch off the visibility, that's really nice.
Yeah, I think that like with this and the emission over parent life curve, like it's like it doesn't have to be just like we have to start and stop or whatever. We can just have particles emit with in a lot more interesting ways than we've ever been able to before, which is really exciting.
And it's another spoiler, so I won't say why it does it, but there's some presets like text slice and such that use the from parent speed in a really nifty way with some of our other physics. It is a really quick way of getting there without having to do a whole bunch of keyframing, like you said.
It's so cool. Fantastic. Like it's really creative.
Yay.
I love it.
Good.
Cool. So this is picking up on some examples for Chad. I love that example you did about the speed, just to sort of see it without any velocity happening on any of the particle systems. Really like explains it really well.
Cool.
And one thing I've been doing lately is sort of trying to find different ways of combining the Trapcode Suite with other parts of Red Giant, such as Universe. And here's an example, and I'll sort of break this down, but we have, I actually have two particle systems in this project. One, the main system isn't emitting that many particles, it's like 10 per second, but this secondary system is an emit from parent. And by bringing down the velocity as well as changing the direction, I was able to sort of get this nice little trail, and using then the velocity over life to slowly, then over its lifespan of like around 4 seconds it kicks in, we can see here that these particles are being dispersed over time. And I basically just repeated this here on the right-hand side. So I wanted to show that, and then I can kind of give a breakdown of some of the other effects that are here in this project. So I have a very simple, your point-based system here. And one thing I love to do with point systems, let me hop into the designer for this. For a lot of particle animations that I'm currently doing is head straight into motion. And I love to kind of play with directional. By doing this and then just simply having some rotation, just allows me and my brain to work in a certain way where I'm able to sort of see how the particles are emitting and to get control over my system. So I'm doing this, and I'm just going to play with the rotation a little bit. Here we go, of my system. And then I'll have this actually start to emit on the bottom of the frame. So that in terms of coordinates, 0, 1080. So I have these particles trailing up, and I'm going to increase the velocity of this system even further. And under particle type, let me increase the life of these particles. And this is another reason, by the way, I love to work with blocks, because in my mind, it's a lot easier to sort of jump to these blocks, see these values appear right away, and then have some real-time feedback directly within the designer. So then heading back to emitter type, this is where I'll bring down the particles per second. So let's go with like 20. And then I'll go back up and change my mind about the velocity, just increasing that a little bit more. So we have just a few particles emitting here for a second. And then Chad, I'll use your, oh, actually this particle system's not emitting too many particles at a given point in time. So I'll duplicate this system, being aware that under emitter type, there's only 20 particles being born per second, and then change my emitter behavior to, emitter type to emit from parent system. And then the minute I do that, I'm going to do a few things. So these particles aren't moving at the same velocity as well as the other various values, which are causing these particles to move all around this main system. So let me head into the motion of the second system that's emitting from the parent. One value that I'm very fond of zeroing out is direction spread. And then after that, let's go down to the velocity of each of these and zero them out as well, just to see what happens, where we can see here's the main, let's go back to the main primary system, and just to differentiate this, I'm going to increase the size of that to like a value of 15. So I have this like nice little pointy particle here, which I'll also give a new color. And then with that secondary system, we have this nice little trail following these main particles. And now that I've sort of squared out these values, I can start to go back and then slowly introduce some velocity over time with my velocity graph here. So knowing that I brought all these values down, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to bring up my velocity to 100, and I'll bring up the direction spread to 15. So we can see what happens when the same direction spread and velocity is the same over the entire lifespan of the particle, the secondary system here. But the minute that I come into the graph, and I'll choose this preset and reverse it, it starts off with a nice trail, and then slowly over time, we've got that velocity over life happening here with the particle systems. And again, it just totally controllable by, even if I bring down the velocity amount here and the direction spread, that controls how much it happens and interacting it here with the curve. So that's essentially, I basically did this and then rotated it a little bit more so it shot upward a bit, replicated the system, and here is this final example. And in mentioning universe at the beginning, there's a ton of universe effects. A lot of them are using their presets, sort of adding this distortion on top of these particle systems. So it's running through a universe heat wave at a very small example, kind of giving a little bit of a flicker with those particles. And let me be brave and actually turn off my proxy system since there's so many effects here, and hop in here and just sort of show some of these effects and how this looks without any distortion effects on top of it. So we've got a shrink ray effect, which I've been using quite a bit now because it basically gives you a shallow depth of field that's GPU accelerated and in some ways can work really well on your particle systems. It's meant to mimic almost that tilt shift effect that you get in a camera. It is meant to mimic a tilt shift effect and make things in that shallow depth of field almost look like miniature toys when you're looking down on it. I then combine that with an overlight effect, some chromatic aberration, and then the heat wave, which is kind of creating that automatic ripple. And I would say that the only thing that's animated with keyframes in this example is the text. So because of that velocity over life curve, you know, some of the blinking values that are available with overlight by simulating that, I didn't add too many additional effects, and this is your little final example here. I had one more to show here. Now, this is a rather robust example, but I've also been experimenting a lot with like literally just animating a light in Z space, right? And then with a simple, what I'm going to call cosine expression on a position value of the light, you can have the light kind of almost follow a wavy path, so to speak. So in this example, there's a light and it's literally just shooting back in a form of Z space off and slightly off to the side right now. And there's a camera that is a child of, it's basically a child of the light. And the light is being referenced by the particle system, right? Which is causing these particles to emit over time. So we can kind of see that the camera is following this light here, the one in the middle of the screen. And slowly as it travels through this kind of universe of other particles, which I made with Trapcode Form and a little bit of Trapcode Lux for the shines, it follows this path. And then eventually one of these particle systems runs into this sort of light, which also has like a floor layer on it. And some particles then, when they hit this bounce layer, other particles are emitted with the emit over life, and we travel through that. So that was the other kind of example I wanted to show with the emit over life. And I should also mention that there's this secondary black trail, which is actually shadowlets following the main particle system. So there's only one particle system for each of the, in total, following each of these lights, and then a secondary system with a very large shadowlet here. And yeah, those are the two examples that I wanted to show.
That's really interesting, Nick.
Awesome,
I was
man.
about to say cool, and then Tatiana on the comments has said it's fantastic. So thanks for that, Tatiana. The one question I had for you, Nick, when you hit that the star, you're effectively running into the 3D solid. What have you got these settings for the particles? Is it to kill, or is it to stop or bounce? Is it to kill, and then because it was the end of life, then you're exhibiting more particles after that?
Yeah, so on the bounce layer, these particles are set to kill. And I also have it keyframed so that some of these particle trails also just start to die off, so that it doesn't emit anymore. So it's set to kill. And then after it's killing and running into this bounce layer, we then have the secondary system emitting on the bounce, which Chad showed a little bit earlier. I guess the best thing is that if you guys are interested in, Simon, I'll supply those two examples if you guys wanted to break it down yourselves.
Oh, as project files, you mean?
As project files, and you can kind of take a look at some of the stuff that I built in here.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Thank you. So yeah. we'll include the project files to the link that you get after this webinar is finished. That'll be amazing.
Yeah,
nice.
And sorry, since this is done, I should just mention, I know we only have a minute, but I did start playing around with fluids in emit from particles, and like this is kind of basically using a grid emitter, which I've recently discovered and is so extremely powerful. You picture this grid that's like literally emitting particles. Then there's a secondary trail of those particles with no velocity being emitted from this. And because you can now mix, I don't know if this was true before, Christine, correct me if I'm wrong, you can mix fluid systems with fast physics. I'll have a spherical, I'm drawing a blank name, but basically
A spherical field. Yep.
a spherical field that's creating a little bit of distortion here with these particles. It's running through it and mixing also with fluids and some shadowlets and some lighting here too. I just thought this was like super cool. Some of the stuff that you could potentially do with like Emit from Parrot and fluid-based systems as well. It's like,
Yeah, I like that one.
sky's
That's
the
nice.
limit with being able to experiment.
Awesome.
Very nifty.
Really nice. Nick, since you've got the screen, could I ask you a favor?
Totally.
I'm not going to bore everyone by trying to show my screen again and failing. Would you mind opening up a browser and then showing where we can watch the recordings, which is the Maxon training team on YouTube. So it's our channel.
Oh, yeah.
So
Hold on, I'll go to the YouTube channel
share that.
and Maxon volume program training. I'm doing this all with my screen paused, so it's going to look simultaneously in a second here. Is it called Maxon Training Team now?
Absolutely.
Oh, look at that. Wow, how'd that happen? It's already there.
That's just amazing.
Impressive.
So this is the page that I was going to show you earlier on. This is where you can see the recordings of all the sessions that we've done this year. It's got something like 40 hours worth of webinars on it, and they're set out into different playlists as well. And Nick, would you mind just clicking on playlist?
Totally.
And then you can see that we've got them into different subject areas. And so if you wanted to jump into Redshift or doing MoGraph with Cinema 4D as well, then those are separate ones. But we've also got more than 100 20-second tips, or 172 we've got there. And these are tips that, in fact, would you mind doing that, Nick? Just click on 20-second tips and say, click on view full playlist. Well, this will do. There you go. On the top right, basically, it's 20 seconds to remind you about a particular technique, or just to remind you that it's available or where it is inside the menu system. And in fact, you've been uploading some recently, Nick, as well, because these are really great memory joggers. And I didn't know you could do that kind of things.
Yes.
So it's
172
really
of them.
cool
I didn't even know there were that many.
just have a look through. I think if you watch them all in one go, you could probably watch them in an hour without a break.
Yes. And at least, even if you're busy, you could at least watch 3 a day, I think.
It is 20 seconds.
That's a minute.
That's a minute of time.
And Kent's mentioned actually that these are useful. He references these quite often. So thanks for that, Kent. That's really good.
It's amazing
Good to
how
hear.
efficient that you are in those 20 seconds. That's crazy.
It's certainly a challenge. It reminds me of the quote. Sorry, I couldn't make you a short letter. Here's a long one. So because it's a bit of a discipline to actually make only 20 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah, that's for sure.
It's an art form in itself.
Absolutely. So what we'll do, I'm just going to switch my camera on again. What we'll do in the follow-up is give you a link for this and also the link for the other things that we mentioned, a link for the free shirt, and we'll also post all of these inside the descriptions on the YouTube channel as well, so that if you haven't got access to your email for whatever reason, you can just go onto this YouTube channel and then access all the links, including the t-shirt code as well. Fantastic.
Woo.
So thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your knowledge and insights. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Christine, for being here. That was great having you.
Yes, thank you, Christine.
Awesome.
Very fun. It's great to see it out there in the wild now. It's very awesome. We're very proud of it.
If you've got any follow-up questions, please reach out to us, training@maxon.net. And since we have Christine's ear now, if you've got any questions about, how do you do this in Trapcode, let us know, and we can just help point you in the right direction. Or if you've got any feature requests, hey, I've always wanted to know if Trapcode could do this, and so on. So
all feedback. I take it off.
Yes, exactly. Fantastic. And a lot of nice comments coming on the questions area. So thanks, Rob. Thanks, Drake. Thanks, Demetrius. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Francesco. And thanks, Hugo. That's great to hear that it's been useful. That's why we do these things. Cool. And I think that's a record. We've only overrun by 5 minutes. Is that the first time?
Screenshot
Take
it.
that as a win. Yes, exactly. Fantastic. So thanks so much, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you on next week's one, where we'll be delving into more of these new features. But stay safe and have fun with particles. Right.
Take care, everybody.
Take it easy.
Bye, everybody.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.